Hi everyone. Welcome to our talk on human trafficking. My name is Jeniffer Zowada. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a clinical supervisor at Casa de la Familia. And I work out of our Orange County office. We also have an office in LA County. And we provide services to individuals for human trafficking. We provide services for domestic violence. We provide services for all kinds of different things for all different populations. We recently have started to focus more on human trafficking, and so we want to be able to share some of that with you today. And I know that I'll repeat this throughout, but if you have any questions, we'd love for you to share those with us. They will be confidential. No one else will be able to see them. Only I will, and I'll try to get to those throughout the presentation. I'm going to give a couple minutes for people to join us. I see that people are coming on. And so I know I talked a little bit about what I do. For those of you that have joined us, my name is Jeniffer Zowada. I, first and foremost, am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also provide clinical supervision at Casa de la Familia. So I supervise our associates and trainees as they're providing services to our community. And those services include a variety of things. We do individual therapy. We offer group therapy, parenting classes. We go out into the community and offer services also. And so lots of different things right now. And so I see that we still have a couple people joining us. I want to give just a couple minutes for people to come on before we get started. I want to make sure that you guys get the most information that you can. And if you're looking to hear this in Spanish, we will be doing a live Spanish version following me with Dr. Nogales at 3 o'clock. And you can find that right here. And we'll be completely in Spanish. So if you or someone you know is looking for that, you can find that here. It will be the same information, just it will be delivered in Spanish. So let's see. See you guys joining. I'm gonna give just a couple more minutes. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask those questions. We have a place where you can ask. It says ask me confidential questions here. And I will be the only one that sees that. So you won't have to worry if you feel like it's something you're not sure about, or and there's no wrong question. You literally can ask me anything. We are going to be talking very broadly about human trafficking today. I'm going to give you kind of a broad overview of it. And the reason for that is that we are planning to jump on here every 2 weeks at the same time and pick a more specific topic of human trafficking to share with you. So this week, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what human trafficking looks like, and then probably talk a little bit more about what commercialized sex trafficking looks like. And in 2 weeks, when we hop back on here, which I believe is on the 20th, we're going to be talking to you more specifically about labor trafficking. And then in 4 weeks, we're going to be speaking to you specifically about what it looks like when we're talking about child sexual trafficking, and a lot of also implementing to that a lot of how we see that happening, how people are getting how children are getting trafficked in that way. So a lot of that is going to have to do with social media and how they are being touched, how they're being reached out into, and people are that's a really big place that they're doing that. So we'll be giving more information about that. So yes, both Orange County and LA County offer the same resources. We have an office in both counties and we offer the same resources. Great question. Both Casa de la Familia and Los Angeles County and Orange County, we're offering the same things. So please reach out to us for more information about that. So let's see, I think, I'm going to start to kind of tell you guys a little bit. I'm going to start to give you an overview of what human trafficking is. A lot of times we think of human trafficking as being something that happens maybe more globally. Maybe we think that it only happens in other countries. And it does happen everywhere. It does happen globally. It happens everywhere. There isn't a place that isn't touched by human trafficking. But the truth is, it's happening very much so in the United States, very much so in California. We're going to talk a little bit later about the biggest places where it's happening. And California, in part of the United States, is one of the biggest hubs for that. We see it a lot in port cities, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But where there are cities that have ports, we see it a lot more often. It's easier for them to travel in and out of. So we have probably the most common, if you've really ever talked about human trafficking, or you've maybe heard of it and you've thought, oh, that's just, it's sex trafficking. That's what human trafficking is. That's a big piece of it. That's one of the types of victimizations. That is not the only type of victimization, though. There are multiple types. We also have labor trafficking, which I mentioned is what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, more about exactly what that looks like. There's also what is called debt bondage and bonded labor. And sometimes this also looks like involuntary domestic servitude. And that looks like someone who's being forced to work against their will. Maybe they're being forced to work in a home for someone. Maybe they're a housekeeper, but they're having to pay a debt that's impossible to pay. And also one that we rarely hear about, but is part of it, is organ trafficking. So as we kind of go down the line here, and we're gonna touch on each one of those, but I want you to get kind of a little understanding of what each different type of trafficking is. And so sex trafficking is the crime of using force or fraud or coercion of another individual for sex. And there's many common types that this looks like. We see this as escort services, also as pornography. Also, something that you may have seen and not even realized was something you were seeing is illicit massage parlors, or illicit massage businesses that maybe on the outside look like a legitimate business, but are actually a hub for human trafficking. Also brothels, and also outdoor solicitation. And something to keep in mind is that anyone, I say anyone, who is under the age of 18 and is selling sex is legally a trafficking victim. They are not able to consent. They are not able to make that decision on their own. So anyone that is selling sex under the age of 18 is considered a trafficking victim. I'm going to talk a little bit about labor trafficking. Like I said, we're going to spend actually an entire Facebook Live on this in 2 weeks, talking about labor trafficking. But labor trafficking is defined as the crime of using force, fraud, or coercion to induce another individual to work or provide services. And so a lot of times we see this in agriculture. We may see it in domestic work, kind of how I mentioned that if someone's working to pay off a debt, but that debt may be impossible to pay off, it may be constantly changing and getting bigger. A lot of times we see this in restaurants. And again, this may be happening where you don't even know that it's happening around you. You may have seen this happening and you don't even realize that it's happening. Cleaning services. This happens in cleaning services businesses also, as well as carnivals. This is another place where, it goes unregulated, and people most often don't even know that that's what's happening to them. Most often human trafficking victims aren't going to identify themselves as a human trafficking victim. Debt Debt bondage or labor bondage, this goes along with how we were talking about labor trafficking. And what this is that it's the recruitment of a person. They want to secure repayment for a service. So we may see this in the way of someone saying that they want to cross the border. And so they're saying, well, we'll help you to do that. You will have a job when you get there. And part of your job is that you will be paying off your debt for this. But then what happens is that they are not, they can't ever pay that off because the debt keeps increasing, it keeps changing, it's an unreasonable debt to have to pay. So maybe they're only getting paid $1 to $2 an hour, right? And they're working constantly, but they're never able to pay off that debt. And so they have no control, and it's an impossible debt to ever pay back. I mentioned involuntary domestic servitude. This also falls in line with labor trafficking. And this goes along the lines of forcing someone to work in the same place that they live. So this could look like someone who, maybe is hired as quote unquote live-in help. But what ends up happening is that the person who has hired them has complete control over them, and they are not allowed to leave the house. They are constantly in the house. They're constantly being told what they can and cannot do. And again, trying to pay off an impossible debt. A lot of times this looks like maybe they were brought here from another country being told that this was a way that they could come here legally to have a job and to be able to work and to be able to become a citizen. But then in fact what happens is that they're never even let out of the house. They wouldn't even know how to get help if they needed to, because they don't know necessarily where they are. They've always been in the home, so they don't have any resources. Now, with having a little bit of an overview, and that was a very, very brief overview of the different types of human trafficking. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how victims are recruited, or even the pathways of entry into human trafficking. And so when we talk about that, we talk about it being a recruitment, a transport, harboring, obtaining, exploiting victims. And often this happens by use of force. Often use of force. It could be threats or lies, other psychological coercion. So meaning that they may be told that they have to do this, or they could be hurt if they don't do this. Or another really big one is that they could be told that their family will be hurt. This happens quite often, is that they get hurt. They are told, if you don't follow through on this, if you don't do what you're told, your family, we will kill your family, or we will harm your family if you do not continue what we've told you to do. And that's really scary because they don't have any contact with the outside world. They've been cut off from their family. And so they don't want that to happen, and they live in fear of that. And so they are going to be doing what they're told. And when victims are recruited, their freedom is stolen from them. Their freedom is stolen, and it's used for profit. That's the essential of human trafficking. The person's freedom is stolen. They are now being sold for a profit. And a lot of times they come into this under false pretenses. Maybe they're promised something. They're promised a job. They're promised a better life. We see sometimes maybe they're homeless and they're promised a home and food, and a way to get off the street. When we talk about, when it happens with teenagers, they're promised, a better life. They're promised they can get away from their family. Maybe they have a bad home situation, and they're promised that they can have something better. But the reality is not better. The reality is far, far worse. Often too, we see that there's a promise of, a promise of money. They can make money and build a life. Maybe they are promised drugs. That's another one. And also one of the big ones is a promise of safety. And they may go into it feeling like this is a safe place. Maybe the trafficker provides them with something that makes them feel safe. And initially they may feel that way, and initially the trafficker may set it up in that way, but that is not how it's going to continue. That is not what's going to continue to happen. And so it's absolutely a false pretense. And so, a lot of times victims are lied to, like I was saying, the ways that they kind of bring them in. And then once they're brought in, they then it can become that they're being assaulted, they're being threatened, they're being manipulated into working in these very inhumane, illegal, and just really unacceptable conditions. So I know I kind of mentioned that a lot of times we think like we may tend to think that this happens in other countries, and it doesn't happen in the United States. And the truth is, it happens very much here, much more than we would like to think that it happens. And it can happen, we talk about recruitment. This can happen at school. This can happen in neighborhoods. It can happen at the mall, in foster homes and group homes. It can happen at the bus stop. The internet is a huge, huge, huge place that this happens, and social media. Very big places that this is happening. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen right in front of you. It can happen under your nose, and you don't even know that it's happening. Some other ways that this happens, I kind of touched a little bit on homelessness. When we delve more into when we look at youth, we'll talk more about this, but 91% of homeless youth will be approached by someone trying to offer them an opportunity out of homelessness, and to provide income and to do something quote unquote better with their life. And that 91%, it's not legit. It's trafficking. And nearly 1 in 5 of our homeless youth are becoming victims of trafficking. Someone offering to pay them for their basic needs. Someone offering to say, hey, I'll make sure that you have a hot meal. I'll make sure that you have a bed to sleep in. You need a blanket? We'll make sure you have a blanket. Some of those just very basic needs. You haven't had McDonald's in a long time? I'll take you to McDonald's right now and get you a meal. Absolutely. And then falling under that false pretense then is the opening of that door, that they then become trafficked. Peer recruitment is also big. Peer recruitment looks like where a peer or a friend introduces them to someone, and says, hey, this is my friend so and so, and I just want you to meet him. He's really fun. We hang out, and sometimes we go to parties, or sometimes we do these things, and well, really this person that they're introducing them to is actually the pimp. And at first he seems really nice and he's really fun and he offers this great time, but the truth is that he actually is offering a step into trafficking. And the peer may introduce her friend to this friend who is her quote unquote boyfriend, and she may believe that that's her boyfriend. And it's a way to make money fast, and you can do these great things and buy the things you want, but the truth is it's trafficking. And yes, to go back to the homeless youth, it is nearly 1 in 5 homeless youth will become victims of trafficking. So yes, 1 out of 5. And this next pathway, I think is probably, and for me was the hardest, and is still the hardest one for me to wrap my head around, is that it's family pimping. And what we mean by that is that It's a mother or a father in this family recognizes that they don't have money for food or for basic needs, or maybe even drugs. And what then happens is that that mother or father sells that child um, for money, for food, or for basic needs, or for drugs. And they then become the traffickers. They become the ones who are exploiting that child or children. Internet and social media, huge, huge pathways to entry, especially right now. Social media accounts, they may create fake social media accounts. It may be adults posing as minors, as peers, and offering to meet up, offering, to want to hang out and get to know them. Um, and it may look like a modeling job. So maybe they're posting, these ads for modeling jobs, and they look like they're it says great paying jobs, modeling. Have you ever wanted to be a model? And they report to this, and at first it looks like up and up, right? It looks like it's a modeling job. It's what they always wanted, um, until things start to go too far. But they've already stepped into this, and they've already been told things by these people, and maybe it just seems too good to be true. And so that's a huge thing that's happening on the internet, and so keeping an eye out for those. um, so I have a question about how to tell as an observer. Let's see, if you're seeing human trafficking, if you're observing something that looks like human trafficking, please don't try to intervene. Okay. um, I would say that you absolutely call and report it. Absolutely, make a call, report it, share that you see that that's happening. Um, if you think that that's happening, and to tell you, wanting to know how to know if you're observing it. That's kind of some of the things that we're going to go through. Kind of so like how I'm telling you a little bit of these things, we're going to go a little bit more into what you may see. If you see someone who, one of the things, if you're seeing an adult who's talking to, a young person and it doesn't look appropriate, that may be one thing. If this minor is dressed inappropriately, and you're seeing this adult that's paying maybe too much attention to them, or is talking to them in a way that doesn't look appropriate, I would say that that's something to look out for. Let's see. Another pathway to entry, and this is something that may be more kind of along the way of what you may have just kind of thought, that that's the way that human trafficking happened, or the way that it's often presented in movies, and the way that we just tend to kind of think about it in terms of violence and kidnapping. And that someone literally pulls up in a car, threatens the person, and threatens them with a gun or another type of force, and pulls them into the car, pulls them into a van, and kidnaps them. This does happen. But the other forms of what we're talking about, it actually happens so much more, in a more just almost covert way. It's not always as overt as violence and kidnapping. It also can happen through, it can be gang related, and it can happen through gang rape. And another huge place that it's happening is in offers for help with immigration. We are seeing this as a huge, huge thing that goes on. So we talked a little bit about, I've told you about recruitments, pathways to entry. When I can't show you my graph, but if you could see it, false job is 44% of what we're looking at. So someone offering a false job to someone. And like I said, that could look like anything. That could look like a job at a restaurant. It could look like a job at a modeling agency. It could look like a job working in a home. providing care or providing cleaning services, so many different things. But that takes up the huge piece of our chart here, is looking at a false job recruitment. And then we look at so many of it sold by family, false immigration promises, a boyfriend, or sometimes they may be called a lover boy. We're looking at that. And abduction again is it's a tiny piece of that. It's what we tend to think of in human trafficking, but it's actually the smallest piece of how that happens. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about the victims, give you a little bit more information about who we're looking at, and globally, but also then breaking it down for you about what we're really seeing in California as well. So when we look at the victims, we're looking at 71% of trafficking victims around the world are women and girls. And then looking at 29% of them are men and boys. And we're looking in 2018, there were, and this is globally, but over 23,000 survivors were identified. And the reason we're looking at 2018 is that we don't have the numbers yet from 2019. So that's why we're telling you in 2018. I can almost guarantee that those numbers are higher for last year. And so talking about a little bit about survivor demographics, according to the Polaris Project in 2018, we were looking at adult survivor demographics was almost 11,000 of adults, and then minors we had almost 5,000, and then unknown we have almost 7,500. And one of the things to keep in mind when we talk about this is that we don't know so many of the victims. We aren't getting reports on so many victims and so many survivors. So these numbers are not necessarily accurate because so much of it goes unreported. Whether that be that it went unreported because it wasn't recognized as human trafficking, whether it went unreported because it's not reported, because it didn't get reported, because so many people don't report it so often. And a lot of times that's because victims don't recognize that that's what it is, or that there's a lot of shame or fear surrounding that. And a breakdown so if we looked at a breakdown of gender, female, we're looking at just over 15,000, male, almost 3,000. And then again, unknown, we're looking at 5,000. So again, that we don't always get all the information about it. We may just get bits and pieces. But when we look at a breakdown in terms of, so just the top 5 reported race and ethnicity, we're seeing that Latino was over 2,000, Asian is almost 2,000, and African American and Black is just over 1,000. White is almost 1,000, and then multi-ethnic and multiracial is almost 200. And again, keeping in mind that these are not complete statistics because we don't get all the information. So again, speaking globally, we're seeing that there are over 40 million people being trafficked right now. And that's globally, but over 40 million people. And then when we look in the United States alone, there are an estimated 50,000 people each year. That's just in the United States. The United States alone, we're looking at 50,000 people. The top 3 states in the United States where human trafficking is occurring, as I said, California is one of those top 3 states. It's California, then New York, and Texas. And the FBI is constantly working on human trafficking, and they have identified 13 major hubs of where child sex trafficking is happening, or where it's coming through. And California has 3 of those 13 hubs. And so what I said before about being when we have a place that's a port, we're looking at again looking at port situations. We're looking at Los Angeles. So the port of Los Angeles, we're looking at San Diego that has a port also, and we're also looking at San Francisco and the Bay Area, again, where they have a port. And these are not just this is not just stops where we're saying, oh, they stop there or they traffic through there for California. No, these are national human trafficking ports. So they've identified these as places where they're nationally trafficking people through these ports, and most specifically children. And one of the things that happens with human trafficking is that they don't typically just come in and stay in one place. Typically, they're trafficked through many different places. So when we talk about they could come globally, they could come from somewhere else and be brought into the United States through one of those ports. That doesn't mean that they're going to stay in the area of that port. Most likely, they will then be transported to somewhere else. It could be anywhere in the US, but the huge places that they're looking at are California, New York, and Texas. Now, we talked a little bit about gangs being part of, that could be a way that they are brought into trafficking. So in Southern California, we have a huge, it's actually the largest intersection of gangs and human trafficking. That we're seeing that nearly 1 in 5 of the arrests for exploitation in Southern California are gang related or gang affiliated. And so looking at, that's something absolutely we want to keep that in mind. We want to know that that's happening, and then it's happening in local gangs. It's happening that these gangs are also, how I said, they're transporting. They're the thing with, if we look at it in terms of when you look at trafficking human beings, because it's a low risk and a high profit crime. Because it's hard to keep track of it. It's hard to know that that's what's happening around them. So again, going back to the report by the Polaris Project in 2018, California alone, we are only talking about California now, not globally, not the United States, just California alone had 3,272 victims identified. 3,272 victims in California alone. And those are only the victims that were identified. Those are only the ones who it got reported that it was identified, and that they are now able to know that statistic. There were so many more than that. And so we look at that out of that came 1,656 trafficking cases. And the breakdown of that is we look at 1,226 were sex trafficking cases, 151 were labor trafficking, and 110 were sex and labor trafficking. So they were both, they were combination. And then there were 169 that were not specified. And so again, we don't have enough information to know exactly what those were. So I want to kind of give you just kind of a little bit of a wrap up. I know I shared so much information, and I want to make sure that I allow for if there's any questions, anything that anyone else would like to know. But to just kind of remind you that human trafficking victims can be anyone. They can come from anywhere. There's no discrimination of whether it's a female, a male, transgender person. No matter what we're looking at, no matter what the race, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter whether it's a child or an adult, it can happen to anyone, anywhere. And it's happening to all ages. It's and really sadly is that, and when we talk more about minors and that specific live is we'll talk more about this, but the average age for minors to begin being trafficked is between the ages of 11 and 13. And I just want to say that to you again. The average age for a child to start the track of being trafficked is between 11 and 13. And I mean, that's when they're leaving elementary school and going into junior high or middle school. So that's a really sobering fact. And, you know, it's, as I said in the beginning, human trafficking is happening all around us. And so our first and foremost step is to bring awareness and start conversations about it, start talking about it. We really want you to know that if this is something that you've experienced or that you know someone who's experiencing it, that we're here. We're here to help. We have a program that is specifically for that. And we're here to talk with you. If you know someone who is experiencing this, be open to having the conversation about it. If you are a survivor of human trafficking, you know, first and foremost, I would encourage you to reach out and talk to someone about that. And if you already have and you're looking for a way to help, there are some great opportunities in that. There are some great places that are doing this work, Casa being one of them. And if you are open to that, that I think that's a great conversation that we would like to have. But also there are so many things that you can do for that, and so many ways that you can help with your own experience. Signs that you can be looking for in a school. I would say that you know, if you're noticing that that they're coming in looking different, if they're coming in looking like maybe they're changing their appearance, maybe you're seeing them talking to someone, or they're, you know, hanging around with a different crowd. I know that some of these probably seem kind of common, but I would say some of the things like that. And also I would encourage, I think that's such a good question. And I would really encourage, if you'd be willing to attend the one on children. I think I would like to get some more resources on that too, and be able to give you those things, because I think that's super important. I think when you're working at a school or you're around a school, even parents of children, but that's something that if you'd be willing to come back, I'd really like to get some more information on that, and not just go off the top of my head, but to give you more information specific to that. Let's see what else we have. So along with that same question, yes, branding. So one of the questions was, are they branded in a certain way? Yes, that can absolutely happen. And so branding being oftentimes a tattoo. And a common place for those, maybe it could be on their neck, it could be near their ear, it also could be on their face. It could be also, they a lot of times will have it on the inside of their lip, and that's something you may not see. But yes, very oftentimes, as someone who is being human trafficked, and children also, is that they're going to have a branding from their trafficker or from their pimp. And what that is a way for them to be recognized as they belong to that person. They belong to that trafficker, they belong to that pimp. And so that's a way of them kind of putting their brand on them, their stamp on them, and so that they can be easily identified as theirs. And if they come in contact with other people, they also know that they belong to them. Yeah. So we only have a couple more minutes, but I want to make sure if anybody else has any other questions. This again was a very brief overview, and I hope that you guys will continue coming back and hearing about our different, going more in depth in each of these different types, and giving you more ideas, more ways to help, more things to be able to recognize. But I want to make sure that if you have any other questions before I start to just kind of wrap up with you guys, but I thank you for taking the time to come and listen to this, to get some more information. This will be posted on our Facebooks, and so you'll be able to watch it later, or maybe there's someone else that you feel like wasn't able to come, but you feel like they really could benefit from it. I encourage you to just go ahead and share it with them. And also to know that, I kind of talked about what we do at Casa de la Familia, and we would love to hear from you. If this is something that you'd like to know more information about, or maybe you feel like it's something you would like to have services for, we would love to have you reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you what it is. If you'd like to know more, if there's something more that we can share with you. And in terms of sex trafficking is very common. It is very common in Orange County, actually. It's very common in Orange County and LA County. And honestly, there isn't, as I said, there isn't a place you can go where you're not going to see it, where it's not going to happen. It is very common there as well. So, all right, guys, I just thank you so much. Please stick around if you'd like to for at 3 o'clock. We will be having the same conversation, but in Spanish. Thanks.